Hello and welcome to the Choreolosophy Podcast. This is episode 163, Catching the Wind in Our Sails with Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. This week, I am pumped to be joined by renowned psychologist, researcher, author, and host of the Psychology Podcast, Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman. We in the performing arts education sphere are in a unique position to have an impact on the whole person in a way that is not accessible to our teacher colleagues in other parts of the building. We offer access to all or many of the levels found in Maslow's hierarchy of needs all at the same time. We offer learning, but we also offer safety, love, and in those elusive moments, we offer transcendence. Musical goosebump moments occur when our singers feel more than just music. They feel themselves connected to each other and connected to something bigger than the sum of the group's parts. In this episode, Dr. Kaufman shares his own personal choir class origin story in which his choir teacher in ninth grade was critical in changing his academic trajectory into being the renowned psychologist and author that he is today. We also discuss one of Scott's areas of academic expertise, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how many people flat out misrepresent it, and as a result of that misrepresentation have come to misunderstand it in many cultural myths. And I have a chance to vent to him a little bit about my frustration in education, which I call the cult of Maslow, which has really bought into a lot of these misconceptions, including a very simple misconception, which is that Maslow never drew a pyramid in the first place. And so the title of this episode, Catching the Wind in Our Sails, is an allusion to a metaphor that Scott came up with, which I think is quite a bit better, and we'll be talking about how Maslow's hierarchy is really better conceived as a sailboat. So Scott is nice enough to help us think through some of those misconceptions in this really fantastic episode, so you're going to want to stick around. The school year is ramping up, so don't forget to get signed up for sightreadingfactory.com, memberships for yourself and memberships for all of your students. It's a crucial tool, and it will help you a lot. Head over there and enter Choreolosophy at checkout to get 10% off. Are you tired of managing multiple platforms to sell tickets, fundraise, and market your performances? Look no further than Ludus.com, an all-in-one solution that's easy to use and free to your organization. With Ludus, you'll have access to a suite of tools and resources specifically designed for the performing arts. From ticket sales to merchandise and fundraising, Ludus has got you covered. So why not give it a try? Save time, money, and resources. Choreolosophy listeners can go to ludus.com/Choreolosophy for an upgrade for free to their marketing suite. The Choreolosophy podcast continues to be free, and I'm working hard every week to provide this free content, but some of you, many of you, have decided, hey, I want to chip in financially to help make sure that the expenses of this show are covered, and just to say thank you to Chris for doing all of this stuff. If that's you, you can go to patreon.com/Choreolosophy and sign up for as little as $3 a month. There are, of course, various levels that you can join, and at the producer or above level, we have Brian Long, Chandler Smith, Venture Studios, John Warner, Jonah Clixbull, Ulrika Igrain Munoz Alarcon, Angie Schilling, Carlos, David Kowalczyk, James Mock, Jared Hendricks, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, Nathan Hines, Ryan Main, and Stephen Kathy Kikachik. Head to patreon.com/Choreolosophy and join the crowd. Okay, everybody, I am here with Dr. Scott Barry Kaufman, and we're going to be talking about a variety of things related to his expertise as a psychologist, but I'm going to let Scott tell us a little bit more about himself here in a second, but I'm excited to talk to a psychological expert, but who also has a choir story and a music education story, so we're going to cover a lot of ground here. Scott, welcome to the show.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. You've been incredibly patient with me to finally make this happen.
Well, yeah, no, and I'm a huge fan of the way you, not only of the way you communicate about a lot of psychological topics, but just also about some of the work you've been doing with just in the genre of creative expression, self-actualization. Of course, I'm a music educator, as you know. Most of the people who listen to this show are music educators. But we also get a lot of people who listen to this show who are just interested in the arts in general. And so when you're talking about actualizing and expressing and trying to get in touch with that kind of authentic version of ourselves, this is something artists care a lot about. So I'm excited about that. Before we dig into that meat, though, Who are you? Why don't you tell the audience who might not know who you are? What is it that you do every day? And how'd you kind of get going on the path that you're in your life?
Yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, I was fascinated with human potential and why some people were getting opportunities and others weren't getting opportunities. Um, and I was in special ed for learning disability and auditory learning disability, which became ironic later on when I discovered I had musical talent, and especially in singing and cello. I remember once in ninth grade, I was just after school, my friends were in the choir. They asked me if I wanted to stop by, and they had to pick something up from the choir room, and I went with them, and I was just making fun of them, and I was by singing like, "Ah!" and the choir director was in the room, and she's like, wow, you're good. And I was like, oh, what? I was just messing around. And she's like, oh, do you want to join the choir? And that meant a lot to me at that time because around that time, ninth grade, I decided I wanted to take myself out of special education and see what I was capable of achieving in life. So that was a really pivotal moment in my life. And for her to see some potential in me was a very surprising new thing. I wasn't used to that. I was used to remediation,
Yeah,
not self belief or belief in me from someone else. It
yeah.
was a bit of a shocker.
Wow. Now, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to drill into your that time of your life just a little bit more. You said you had an auditory disorder of some kind, or was it a condition, but my curiosity was spiked there because then if you're saying there's something going on auditorily in your young life, and then music then becomes something that you kind of found a home in school. Were those things related at all? Were you like sensitive to sound? How would you describe that?
I had something called central auditory processing disorder in the first couple years of my life. I think I developed it from having a lot of fluid in my ears. It made it harder for me to process things in real time. So I would be
Mm,
a couple milliseconds behind, and I would have to replay what someone had said to me in my head before I could respond. So that came across as though I was stupid. So everyone
mm,
thought I was stupid for many years. Um, and well, I thought I was stupid too. So there you go.
yeah,
That was a shocker when when I discovered that I wasn't. So yeah, so I mean, I always had musical talent, though I believe, because my grandfather. I think I got that genetically from my grandfather. He was a cellist with the Philadelphia Orchestra for 50 years. Which is, I believe, the record in the Philadelphia Orchestra, and I grew up around some of the greatest conductors, and Yo-Yo Ma and um, others were friends of the family. So I feel like music was in my blood and my surroundings as early as could be.
yeah, yeah. And so when you go into the choir room and you're messing around, and I will say that in my own experience, 20 plus years teaching high school choir, I I have encountered that scenario that you just described many times, where I will hear a kid just making a vocally playful sound that is actually quite remarkable, but they think of it as just screwing around. And they
Mhm.
think of it as just a playful sound, and I'm able to point out to them that, hey, actually, that's kind of what we try really hard to achieve in this class, and you're doing it already. Can you come join this class? This is actually what we try to do. And so this teacher that you had in ninth grade, I think it was you said ninth grade, made this comment to you, and it impacted you. Could you talk a little bit more about that experience and what that and how that impacted you and where you went from that kind of that first meeting with that teacher?
Really impactful experience. Regina Gordon, um, she asked me to join the chamber choir, and I stayed after. So it was after school. It wasn't choir during, and then I eventually joined choir during the regular. I loved it so much, and I found it such a transcendent experience, and I loved learning music. Around the same time, I decided to join the orchestra as well and started taking up cello. My grandfather was teaching me how to play cello, so I was in choir and orchestra at the same time. and actually won the all department music award when I graduated senior year, and that meant a lot to me.
Hmm.
Um, and even the crescendo, so to speak, of it all was a performance of Porgy and Bess, where I was playing with the orchestra, and then I put the cello down and stood up and sang the solo. Bess, you is my woman now. You is, you is. And then I sat back down and started playing the cello again with the orchestra, and everyone got a kick out of that.
Oh wow, that's incredible. That's a really neat story. And you you would also mentioned as part of that kind of that story that prior to this, or really just in your younger years, you thought of yourself as stupid. In and then you get to high school and experiences like this. Maybe there were others, I don't know. You can tell us that story if you'd like. But I imagine, because this is something I've encountered too with kids, is that sometimes when kids come to a music class, they might feel stupid other places. But then, and they might have an IEP, like an individualized education program of some kind, or like it's just some kind of modification to their education that they've been used to. And then they'll come to my class, and I don't have no clue that they're impaired in any way, because when they come to a music class, some of their difficulties that they experience in other classes fall away. Is that at all part of your experience, or would you say it was kind of different for you?
Well, completely resonate with that. I mean, I outgrew my auditory disability by fifth grade.
Uh huh.
Um, I was kept in special education because then I developed an anxiety disorder, because I was in special ed.
Hmm.
That's why I developed it. It was because of them. But then they kept me in it. They're like, "Well, you got to stay in here because you're anxious for being in here." Um, all fucked up, dude. It's all fucked up. But I don't know. Probably can't curse on my
No,
Coral
it's
Law
okay. It's okay.
podcast. um, but yeah. So I mean, I didn't really have a disability. I think that once I decided to take myself out of special ed, I felt empowered to not have that kind of victim mentality anymore. And that was a big, big change in my life. That was it. Just like almost overnight, I decided I wanted to shed this label, this victim label that was put on me. I just wanted to throw it in the trash can and see what I was actually capable of achieving without the labels put on me. And that changed my life. And I discovered I loved learning. I went from like a remedial student to like a straight A honor student, like in one semester, which is crazy. I mean, it's crazy. I wasn't even college bound. And I discovered that I just was ravenously curious about everything. It was like something was stored within me that wanted to get out. I became unleashed. Scott Kaufman unleashed in ninth
Yeah.
grade in high school. But music was a core part of that. I realized I was good at something, and like really good, like really good. I ended up actually getting a scholarship to Carnegie Mellon University for music. I was in a music conservatory. So you think about, I didn't do anything before ninth grade. So in 4 years, I became good enough to get into one of the top musical conservatories in the country. That's not bad.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, that's wonderful. Now, when you went to college, because I want to kind of progress through how this story happened in your life, because of course now you're a psychologist by trade, and you do a whole bunch of other super cool stuff. I'll put your whole bio in the show notes so people can read about
Cool.
it later. But and you're doing music still through high school. You're doing music into college. At what point did you make the psychology trajectory switch, so to speak?
Yeah, I think psychology was always also in my blood. Music and
Okay.
psychology. As early as can be, I was fascinated by human potential and why people differ from each other, and why us kids in the special ed room were stupid, and why the gifted kids were so smart. I thought some of them were stupid. I'm just joking. But half joking. But I think that I just got to this point where I was like, you know what, I want to double major. So I actually applied to Carnegie Mellon for both opera and cognitive science. and I got rejected from the cognitive science program. So I did apply in high school to the psychology program at Carnegie Mellon,
Oh.
but I got rejected. My SAT scores were not high enough to redefine the standard metrics of potential, which is what I put in my personal statement we needed to do. I said we really needed to redefine standard, human potential and change. I still have the personal statement saved. What does it mean to achieve? What does it mean? What is it really all about? And standardized metrics are not the best predictor of these things. They're basically like, good story, bro, but your SATs aren't high enough to do any of that.
That's ironic. Yeah.
Yeah, probably ironic. So I still auditioned for the opera program and got accepted, and I snuck in through the back door. Yeah, yeah. Once I
Yeah.
got to Carnegie, I went there at the end of my freshman year and asked if I could be a minor in psychology, and then
Mhm.
switched it to a major.
Yeah. Now that's interesting because I actually don't find that all that weird of a combination, and I'm interested in your thoughts on that too. But the combination of vocal music in particular and psychology, a lot of singers when they're trying to work out their problems, a lot of those problems are psychological. In that I'm afraid to make a sound because I'm afraid to be judged. And then because I'm afraid to be judged, then there's tension in my body, so I try to sing and then it doesn't come out right. And then, of course, the diagnosis later is, well, that's a singing problem. But then oftentimes I'm like, well, no, that's not. There's a psychological issue happening there. And so there are great books about this actually, about singers talking about their inner psychological battle, trying to overcome their own vocal problems. So it's actually not all that strange. Did you ever make any observations about the inner mind of the singer when you were singing more frequently?
That is really deep. Uh, I found that the vehicle of singing, once I was in the mode of singing, a lot of my anxiety dissipated, and I sort of an alter ego came out.
Ah, that's
Uh,
great.
and I also was really into the boy band music. The Backstreet Boys were big, and when I was in college in the year 2000, and I found that my shyness with girls actually was dissipated when I if I sang I Want It That Way to them. I became a different kind of person, and it really gave me a lot of confidence. To be a voice major at Carnegie Mellon was like, I mean, it was considered sexy. Like a lot of the girls really, they're like, "Oh, sing to us," "sing to us," and so that gave me a newfound confidence I never had before. So I don't know if that relates to your question at all, but I would say actually my singing mind really like superseded, or like they created this alter ego for me that was beneficial.
Yeah. No, and that's interesting. That's a great. It does relate to my question because so I definitely, in my teaching experience, have seen both. I've seen the kid who just, like you said, Scott unleashed. I've seen the kid who is unleashed by their opportunity to express through singing. But I've also seen the other side, where sometimes kids will. I mean, my own child, who's 10 feet away in another room right now, is that same way. She loves singing, but if she hears me walking down the hall and knows that I'm getting closer as she's singing, she will get quieter because she doesn't want to be judged. And so you definitely come across all of those personalities with singing. But I guess like we were saying before, the human potential is so wide ranging and multifaceted, and I would have to imagine that the diversity of personality plays into a lot of these things, whether it be human potential in singing or in academics or whatever it is.
Totally. I think that in high school, once I got unleashed, I think I probably became arrogant. I went from like totally shy and like introverted and like couldn't talk to anyone. I felt like a loser, to when I discovered that I had this talent. I think I overcompensated. Some of my friends from high school, this is what they tell me. They say that I came in there like to the choir, kind of like they've been in it their whole lives, and I just came in there, and I was like, to me it was like over enthusiasm, but to them it was like, who is this kid coming in here, thinking he's such hot shit. But they didn't know my whole backstory. They didn't know that it's not like I thought like I was hot shit. I just was like so excited that I was like good at something. I never knew I could be good at anything.
If your school or church are in the market for staging products like risers, shells, podiums, movable platforms, all of the things that you need to set your choir up for success, I would like to strongly urge you to check out StageRight. StageRight's products are sturdy, they're durable, they're easy to use. I have personal experience with the acoustical shells and some of the platforms that they have at StageRight, and I can tell you, compared to some of the more expensive competitors, they are a really great option to fit inside of a tight school budget, but also to give you the durability and usability that you need. So check out StageRight at stageright.com. Right? Well, yeah, that is. I wish that I could bottle and sell what you just described. In here, what I mean by that is like, I know when kids come into my classroom, I know that they're gonna encounter a lot of those confidence boosting experiences, but I can't convince them of that until they actually have the experience. So in other words, I can't put on a flyer, hey, come join choir, because you're going to be really scared at first, and then you try to sing and you're going to not feel like you're very good at it. But if you work really hard for 2 or 3 years, you're going to be really good, and then you're going to be confident. Like, none of that doesn't fit on a it doesn't fit on a flyer, and nobody's going to believe it. They have to like actually feel it. They have to experience it, which is actually one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show, because it even though you went, your life went on a different trajectory with singing and then into psychology, we need to know sometimes as teachers, I think, how powerful that those interactions, even if it's that first interaction with a kid, maybe it doesn't feel like they're the best student. Maybe they don't feel like their life trajectory has gone very well so far up until age 15 or whatever. And sometimes we forget the power we have as educators to just be there at the right place at the right time, offering the right opportunities to kids so that they can kind of meet that human potential that you now do a lot of studying for.
Your heart's really in the right place with what you do.
I try. I
Yeah.
try. I want to be there but that's also the trick, though, is I don't necessarily know either. I don't know what the right place at the right time is for each individual kid, and that's tough,
It's not right for everyone at every time, you
right?
know?
That's true.
It's
That's true. So if we could, Scott, I would like to kind of grill you a little bit more now, now that we've kind of gotten some of this backstory on the work that you do now, and how it kind of relates to some of these things. So if you wouldn't mind, just kind of let people know, like on a day-to-day basis, professionally, what are you working on? What are your big projects in life at this point?
it really relates so much to everything we're talking about. So I started a new form of coaching I call self-actualization coaching, and we're hard at work creating a training program for that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, really, I have a vision to really create a training program for educators to think of themselves as self-actualization coaches. So we would ideally go into a whole school district and train them on all these principles that seem that are mostly among adults, adult personal coaches. Like to me, why are these principles not within the school system? I'm not talking about sports coaches. I'm talking about personal coaching and the science of human potential. There's so much potential in the schools to help kids with that. So anyway, we're in the middle of building up that training program for coaches, and starting there, and then branching out to education and healthcare and the business world. Also working on a new book right now, which is going to be explosive.
Oh
um,
yeah.
uh,
Are you able to give a little, like, why is it explosive?
it's a controversial book. It's a very controversial book, and
No, no hints. You're not
I
allowed to give any hints.
can't say anything more. Can't say any
Okay.
more.
All right. We're
Wait,
excited. We're
wait,
excited.
wait a year and a half from now when it
Okay.
comes. But it's yeah, a societal critique, and self-help in one. And then I mean, I'm working on so many projects that it's all like, uh, my podcast. I forgot my podcast. So, that's a weekly, and brings a lot of meaning in my life. Having guests on that we get to talk about the science of potential and mental health. Mental health is a really big topic that I'm trying to cover more in my podcast. It's called the Psychology Podcast. Yeah, but a lot right now is going into this book.
Yeah.
That's
Now, so in your when you're writing books, is that what prompts most of the research that you've done, or did you do research in other contexts which led to the book? Does that even make sense as a question?
Oh, definitely makes sense as a question. I it's hard to do a clear cut separation there. I would say that I've done enough research on a particular topic the past 10 years that I've decided it's ready for a book on the topic. Narcissism. So yeah, I've done enough. I've done enough research on this topic that I decided it's reached a critical mass and it's relevant enough to our society today that it's time to write it. So I think sometimes that comes down to that. Like when I wrote Transcend, I was really doing a lot of work, research, but also I was feeling inspired because I was having an existential crisis, and that I really got into existential humanistic psychology and that perspective, and that Transcend was all about that perspective. So sometimes it's a combination. I would say it's an interaction between what's going on in my life at the time and what. My research shows. Someday, I mean, I've long wanted to write a book on how to overcome shyness talking to women, and I want to write a dating guide for shy, geeky guys. But I can't. I mean, how much longer am I going to wait to write that? I'm going to be a 50-year-old man and write that book. Like so that maybe the ship has sailed on that one, but you never know.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. I know I've had a couple other psychologists and researching type psychologists in that vein of psychology on the show before, and one of them had said that in psychology as in lots of sciences, research oftentimes is me search, where me and he meant by
Always.
that. Say it again.
You don't mean oftentimes. You mean always.
Always, yeah. I think he was just trying to be polite. But just the idea that, what inspires you to do the research in the area that you do is oftentimes, or always, as you said, I'll stop being polite, guided by something that you experienced as a kid. And I'm assuming, I think from your story that you told as kind of your origin story, you're doing a lot of this work about kind of studying the way that people figure out their own potential. Some people call it self-actualization. Waking up to their potential, whatever it is, the term that you like. It is because you must have gone through a period in your life where you were worried whether or not you'd be able to do that, and then you're wondering, and then you were able to achieve later. And so I would imagine that a lot of your work is trying to pass that forward, pass that knowledge forward, so that other kids and teachers are able to help more little Scots. Fair?
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I run the Center for Human Potential, and this is our mission. And we teach classes. We try to educate the public. We create training programs. We have coaches on our roster that people can go in with various fees, the levels of fees. And yeah, it's everything is about that, and unlocking the potential of all of humanity. Like human potential is so vast, and yet we're so not living up to the promise right now in America. Um, and it's really frustrating to see the way people are engaging with each other right now. It's frustrating to see the divisions and the polarization because we're capable. Humans are capable of so much more.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautifully said. That's beautifully said. I would like to ask you also about one of the other reasons that I asked you to come on the show, which is Abraham
Yeah.
Maslow. I want to talk about Maslow, if that's okay, because I know you've done a lot of work on Maslow research and history, and also trying to communicate to folks where some people misunderstand Maslow. And I know my own just cursory knowledge of the history of Maslow's hierarchy as this idea that kind of exploded onto the American and Western world's consciousness in the 60s through I guess you would say corporate trainings and leadership trainings and stuff. But in my 20 years of teaching, it has become an education thing too. Like in education, we pull out that triangle, like every year, and it is spoken about in ways that, just because I've done a little bit of reading about this, where I can kind of see where teachers tend to make mistakes in how they apply Maslow's hierarchy. I've even gotten to the point where I've in education I've started calling it the cult of Maslow,
Wow.
because teachers and in PD trainings I will see this very explicit. The kids must achieve all the things on this bottom level of the triangle before you can do things like teach math. And it has to happen in that order, and it's very strict. And if I post suggestions through the podcast channel that might not be correct, I get more hate about that than almost any other time.
Really?
Yes,
Really?
yes, because since that's in the mind of a lot of teachers that I've spoken with, that is like proven science, and therefore, if I'm questioning Maslow, then I'm questioning the science or whatever. So anyway, that's my little rant about one of the
Pushback.
things that I'm interested in hearing some perspective from you who's studied this topic a lot. A, why you got interested in Maslow, and just what are some ways that people tend to get it wrong.
It's so funny. I've never gotten any pushback when I criticize the way. Well, I'm not. The thing is, I'm not criticizing Maslow. I'm criticizing the way he's been portrayed.
Correct.
Uh,
Yes.
because he never drew a pyramid. He
Yeah.
never. There's no triangle in any of his writings. Um, I think there's this notion that he thought self-actualization was a very individualistic thing, and you'll see a lot of people, on the far left politically, really hate Maslow, and say that it promotes individualism and it doesn't take into account the importance of groups and social. The far left because they love groups. So so
Right.
okay. So how can we integrate all these things, right? And I think all this stuff can be integrated because Maslow very much appreciated the importance of belonging. He really appreciated the importance of transcendence, and he viewed all these things as needing to be integrated in order to transcend. You can't transcend without the self-actualization. I mean, you can't. Some people try, and then they have a very faulty foundation
Mm-hmm.
for growth. So you may see like leaders in the spiritual gurus who have claimed transcendence, and yet they're clearly don't have their basic needs. They still have their like self-esteem needs not met, or they're basically using their spirituality as a way to actually boost their ego, not actually grow transcendence. And so clearly they're not actually self-actualizing. So when you are self-actualizing and you're going through that process, you really are facing um, a process where its ultimate goal is to erase itself, as Maslow said. When done right, self-actualization is merely a bridge to transcendence, and it's hard to walk over the bridge of transcendence without that self-actualization, without fully developing your capacities, your highest capacities, your most your highest creative potential. If you let that flounder, you let your highest creative potential flounder, um, then uh, you're really basing transcendence on a very faulty foundation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good summary. I've got right in front of me here. I've got a website. It's called educationlibrary.org. I'm not trying to call out this website in any kind of way. I just want to read a couple of statements to you as an example of what I was talking about before, about how Maslow often gets the Maslow's hierarchy concept often gets presented in teacher trainings. So here would be one. Starting at the bottom of the pyramid, physiological needs are the first priority and must be satisfied first. These needs include nourishment, sleep, clothing, and shelter. These seem pretty basic. People must have these basic needs met in order to focus on anything else. Now, my understanding is that that's not really what Maslow was claiming, in the sense that it's not like you achieve level. I think you did a big think video on this actually, where we shouldn't think of it as you must fully unlock level 1 before you can get to level 2. And there was some research done where, like, for example, if I'm thinking in the educational setting, if I were to say that every physiological need must be met before I can move on to other things like teaching math or like teaching music, then you're going to leave a lot of kids waiting. And you're also then going to say, well, like in a third world country, for example, they have a lot of needs not met. Should we just not teach them math? These problems come in to if you interpret Maslow in a way that is this like level one, then level two, and then level three, rather than a integration of levels. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, Maslow made it clear that you can target multiple needs simultaneously. Life
Yes.
is not a video game where you reach one level of needs and then some voice from above is like, congrats, you unlocked, the next level, and then you kind of go up in some way in some sort of video game sort of way. And he made it very clear that we're constantly choosing growth and moving one step forward, but then we can fall two steps backward at any moment. Life is just is this unfolding, this constant dynamic process. When you're hungry and you eat, it's not like you're never hungry again. When if you don't nourish your relationships, you'll feel lonely again. We have to constantly work at growth. Just view that whole model of the pyramid is not in line with really how he thought about it. I think a sailboat is more in line with how he thought about where we have to integrate a secure base, a boat, that doesn't have too many holes so it doesn't sink, but one that integrates that with opening up the sail and moving, and you're constantly in motion with this foundation and your connection with yourself. A lot of people, unfortunately, these days are really disconnected from themselves. That can happen through trauma. I think that's a common outcome of trauma is you feel a disconnection from yourself, but it can happen in so many other ways. It can happen when we're not living by our values. It can happen when we're out of touch with what are our values? Who are we? What do we want out of life or a purpose, or a calling? But I think that the good news and the hope there is that I think that we really become instantly connected to ourself. Um, it can happen, very quickly once we snap into a calling or things start to make more sense for us in our lives and we start to feel more grounded and understanding who we are and what we really are about in this life.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I'd seen. I was hoping you were going to mention the sailboat. I had that little tab pulled up on from your website also, which of
Cool.
course also will be linked in the show notes. But the you have this page on the website about the sailboat metaphor, and it's really well thought out and well done. And one of the things that I liked about it is actually, and this was something as a teacher, I think about this stuff a lot. From as a psychologist, you think about it possibly from a different angle. I'm thinking about it from the perspective of I've got all these children who come into my room with a variety of different life experiences, a variety of different social economic backgrounds, a lot of different turmoils in their lives and in their homes. Or maybe they moved here from a completely different cultural region, and so now they're here, and just being where I am is kind of traumatic for them because they're having to be on guard all the time. So it's so diverse what their needs are, and the reason I like the sailboat metaphor as opposed to the triangle is that you have this drawing on the website, and people can mostly are listening to this audio only, so I can show it to them on the internet later. But it is the idea of the base, and I don't know if you did this on purpose. Was the sailboat drawing, by the way, was that yours, or did you borrow that from somebody? The one that's on your website.
Oh, that was illustrated by my illustrator Andy Ogden. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I just wanted because I wondered if you did it on purpose, where you separated the what is that base, which is self-esteem, connection, and safety, and then
Yeah.
there's like a little mast where the sail is purpose, love, and exploration. Is that intended to show that there is kind of a difference between those needs and what they're for?
Okay, so the way I think about it is that you have the security system and you have the growth system. Uh,
Ah, okay.
and the security system is comprised of safety, connection, and self-esteem, and they're so deeply intertwined and dependent on each other. If you knock one out, the other two tend to fall as well. If you tend to boost one, the other two tend to spiral upward. And but they're separate systems. So you could spiral upward in security, but that doesn't mean you're growing.
Mm-hmm.
You can feel great about yourself. You can feel connected to others, and you can feel safe, like your health is safe and you're not in danger, but not move in the direction of your most valued port. Like, what port do you want to sail to? You might still not know what it is
Yeah.
and still be secure. So in order, the growth system comprises exploration, love of humanity, and purpose. When those three things are deeply connected, they are connected, but when they are kind of firing on all cylinders, so to speak, you really feel like you're moving
Right.
in the vast unknown of the ocean. And
Yeah.
yeah, you really feel like you're moving towards growth.
I
Um,
love that.
yeah.
I love that, and I also I see it when I look at that image. Also am kind of made aware of that where that you made that separation between the growth system and the security system as in an education context. And feel free to at any point if you think I say something dumb, you're allowed to on this show. You're allowed to tell me that it sounds dumb, but it seems to me like I know that as a student, if I have a student who is literally starving because their parents don't provide nourishment to them, that is going to impede their education, but in a different way than if they are lacking the ability to explore or if they're lacking the ability to feel like they belong in a group. Like those things, it makes sense to me that just like food and shelter would be at that base, but it doesn't. It also doesn't mean that they're equal levels to because oftentimes, like I said, the argument gets made that not until we've achieved all those levels can we start to do other things like teach them to do stuff. And I think this is where I kind of get frustrated with that because and that interpretation of Maslow because kids need to start learning to do stuff like on the first day of school. And so
Yeah.
I can't wait for 3 months to get them to feel love and belonging and purpose and passion for music, for example, and then say, okay, now we can start quarter notes. Like it's not it won't that's not going to serve the students best. And so I think what I'm interested in is your thoughts about just this. You said it a minute ago, but your thoughts about the idea that we can access multiple levels at the same time, and how the triangle image makes people sometimes misunderstand and miss that very important observation. Does that seem reasonable?
Oh, yes, it definitely seems reasonable. I mean, the thing with the sailboat is it's not a hierarchy anymore of in the sense of it's not a strict hierarchy. It's all operating within us to various degrees at various times, and we try to integrate these things as much as possible. It is hard to um, sing your heart out when your mind is preoccupied with lower needs.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I remember once I was at a choir performance and I had to pee really bad, and the only thing I could think about was when the whole thing would be over and I could run to the bathroom. So that's just a rudimentary example of this, but so we must recognize that um, when lower needs are not being met, it does make it much, much harder to do the higher order cognition and to put our attention or focus on other things. So Maslow's theory of motivation does make that point. Without drawing the hierarchy, he does make the point that there are lower needs and higher needs, and lower needs do take precedence over higher needs often.
Mm-hmm.
But we, but
Yeah.
yeah, but you're right. Your point still stands very much so that you don't have to um, completely wait, to deal with the higher to help with the higher needs.
Right. Yeah, and I like how you say it's not a strict hierarchy, even though there are some certain things that are hierarchical. I know I don't I'm in my own life, for example, you use the example of having to singing your heart out when you have to pee. For me, singing when I was a kid, singing in choir in high school. Obviously, I'm a choir teacher now, so it's easy to predict that I was into choir then too. I loved choir, but I had some traumatic things that happened to me as a kid. That choir, it was almost like the hierarchy worked backwards in some situations where I did not feel my lower needs met. I did not feel safe in certain situations. And then the ability to go to choir and sing when my lower needs were not being met actually allowed me to for brief moments, definitely not, I wouldn't want to sustain that model over my whole life, but for brief moments skip some of those lower needs and access some of that love and belonging and actualization that happened at the top. And I think maybe that's another reason that I'm sensitive to this idea that the hierarchy has to be, achieved in order, is because I'm afraid some kids might miss out on what I experienced as a kid.
First of all, I'm very sorry to hear about your early experiences, but it sounds like you've really made a lot out of it. What they call it post-traumatic growth. It
Yeah.
sounds like you've had a lot of that in your life, and you're an example and an inspiration to so many kids. So it's wonderful. Congratulations on doing that, or well done on doing that. But uh, I think that we can just yes end this and say, uh, as teachers, we should be aware of differences among our students in terms of where they're coming at, when they come to not everyone's coming to the table, the classroom from the same space, the same level of safety, the same level of feeling, that uh, that they can focus on the lesson plan, and for some students it's almost like a privilege for them to be able to focus so well on higher level math, whereas for other students, they have a lot of other neat things that take a lot more priority in their own safety and before they can really put their full attention. So that's the one hand, but on the other hand, uh, as a student, it's also really important to be aware that you can you're allowed to not always focus on your safety. You're allowed to sometimes skip the steps and engage in a transcendent experience, and live in a fantasy world sometimes is just escape. And sometimes higher level mathematics for some students is an escape for them, for their horrible things going on around them in other ways, or maybe for someone singing, whatever the talent is, or whatever the passion and love is. For me personally, it was computers.
Mhm.
When I was in special education as a kid, I retreated into this world that no one knew about, where I was a computer hacker, and I was a darn good one. I should have been arrested by the FBI. When I was 12. That's how good I was.
Wow.
But I know. And to me, that was my way of regaining a sense of agency. That was my way of, I shared computer games online for people. I hacked computer games and shared it online for people, and it gave me a sense of agency. Now, the interesting thing is, as soon as I felt more agency in my life, so as soon as I got in the choir and orchestra, and my life changed in high school, where I was starting to get good grades, I suddenly lost all of my interest for computer hacking almost overnight, and never looked back. Never did computer hacking ever again. So it's just so interesting how sometimes um, we try to regain a sense of agency that we've lost in some ways that are not incredibly legal or beneficial. But I don't know, just I'm a big believer in having compassion for kids, and understanding where they're coming from, and viewing that within the context of, well, maybe there's a different way we can give them agency, as opposed to just treating them as though they're a monster, treating them as they're just, like kids who sell drugs, oh, they're just bad kids. I don't really like that approach, like, give them another avenue where they can give them an alternative.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that's
Choir. It's
that's
choir.
beautiful. Yeah, no, sorry, I missed that last part. Go ahead.
I said maybe it's choir.
Ah,
Maybe
yes,
that's her.
right. Yeah, I actually, as a choir teacher, obviously I would be biased towards yes, maybe it's choir, but at the same time, I also want to be humble enough to recognize that maybe it's not choir for some of my
Sure.
kids, and I want to make sure that they're, all the things that we just talked about, that they're going through that process with something in their life. And so even if in my class, if I can provide an opportunity for them to feel like they're smart, even if
Mhm.
choir doesn't end up being the thing that they do, as their thing. I just want kids to find that they have a thing, but I want my class to be a place where any kid, even if they're a beginner, is able to come in and feel like they're growing. And my entire grading philosophy is I actually grade on growth, for example.
Yeah, I
So
love that. I love
if
that.
I have if I have a kid who's like an all-state level kid and a kid who's never done it before in their entire life, and they're next to each other in the class, they both have to get better to get an A.
Mm.
And I've worked my whole career to try to figure out ways to measure that. And it's a different podcast for a different episode, but and that's the philosophy. It kind of very much aligned with a lot of the things we've been talking about. Is if once we stop pursuing that moving towards the or letting the wind blow into the sails to keep your sailboat metaphor going, that's when kids kind of die on the vine, so to speak.
Beautiful. Yeah, no, I really like your philosophy. It sounds like I would have enjoyed being in your choir
Yeah,
as a
well,
kid.
and if you had made those weird noises in the hall or whatever, I would have dragged you, dragged you in there as well. Yeah, like come and sing. It's interesting because kind of going back to the idea we were talking about a second ago too, where yes, we want the lower needs to be met first, and that is going to be in the ideal world that would be true for all kids. But at the same time, and I'm interested in your kind of expertise on this too, with just the psychological research, et cetera. But I also feel like sometimes if we can get even a person to experience even a brief moment of love, passion, exploration, whatever it is on the diagram, even if some of those lower needs are not being met, there are ways to help people experience those things even in the short term, which can then almost, not to lack of a better term, reboot their whole process. And I keep thinking, I think about my story, that I gave before about my traumatic experience. For example, well, I won't make too big of a downer of it, but when I was in eighth grade, I walked in after to find my mother having been beaten and left bloody on the floor of our house. Our house had been broken into, and I was
Oh,
the one who came home to find her. And 13, 14 years old, and I'm the one who has to pick her up off the ground and put her onto the bed and cover her up. They had torn all of her clothes off. It was very traumatic. And
she live? Did she
well, say
live?
again. Say again.
She live?
Yes, yeah, she did. They had held her at gunpoint,
Oh,
and they had told her that they were going to kill her, but they at the last second decided not to.
oh my God.
And like I said, at that time, if you're thinking about those lower level needs, I did not feel safe. I did not feel like I was, and this, of course, that kind of trauma doesn't just go away the next morning when you go to school. You bring that with you to school, and then you process through that over the course of the rest of your life. And yes, you're right to observe that. I've done a lot of work to put all of that part of my life in context. But if I hadn't had my choir class to go to, and skip over some of those lower level needs for that short amount of time to access some of those higher level needs, I don't know that I would have been able to process it in the same way.
Yeah.
Does that seem, is this crazy? Or am I just am I overthinking this, do you think?
Oh my God, you're definitely not overthinking it. Not everything needs to be put within the framework of needs. I think
Ooh, yeah.
this conversation also can be put within a different context and one that's been more on my mind lately, and that's the context of identity. And I would argue that it's very important for kids to not be reduced to a single victimhood identity,
Mm.
um,
Hmm.
or a trauma identity. And you're allowed to have aspects, you're allowed to be a multifaceted human. And I would actually frame it in your experience and say, well, what you're able to do is add other positive aspects to your. So I am a choral singer. Like, you're allowed. It just seems like in the society today, you're only allowed to have victim identities. Like, that's it. But why can't you be, I am a loving person? That's an identity. I am a creative person. I am a singer. I am a mathematician. Why can't we empower our youth through positive identities? It seems like just our whole culture right now is steeped in just identities that reduce a person to their victimhood, and I think, or their experiences, which don't need to be ignored. Obviously, like, you needed to process that for sure, what happened to you.
Yeah.
But if that was all that you became all of a sudden, that would never have led to you growing as a human. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think having the outlet of singing in my choir was a part of it. Part of my ability to process that. Part of it was actually my mother herself, her choice to respond to how the aftermath of that, rather than watching her kind of decompose into a soup of self pity. I watched her go into battered women's shelters and give speeches and volunteer to help other women later who had been in that situation. And so I was lucky in the sense that I saw that live out. So I saw her choose to react that way after the fact, and it did empower me to go on and do that. And I do have to recognize sometimes with my students that have been through similar things that not all of my students are lucky enough to have that role model, or the support system that I had after that all happened. I had a support system. Not all of my students do. So I'm sure you're familiar with like the ACEs scale, that adverse childhood experiences scale. And my score, that wasn't my only thing. That my
Uh,
childhood was kind of tumultuous in a variety of ways, and my ACEs score is pretty darn high. And you look at like statistically, I should be an alcoholic. I should be probably have committed crimes and all that kind of stuff. I know that's not how stats work, but I look back and I think about the fact that if even though those bad things happened to me, I was lucky in that I had all of these other things going for me, which not all of my students do. But I think you're exactly right that one of the things that I had going for me is exactly what you just described. I had role models and a support system to help me identify with other parts of my being other than my victimization.
there you go. I mean, yeah, you were able to form a complex identity that
Hmm.
didn't reduce you to your worst experiences in life.
Hmm.
And not only that, but allowed you to focus on some of the best in you. And that's why I'm into positive psychology. I'm into humanistic psychology. All these, they were both a form of corrective against a psychology that focused almost exclusively on what's wrong with people. Like, Freud wasn't a terribly good positive psychologist.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Now is so I've never I'm not super familiar with the term positive psychology other than just the context you gave it. Does that simply mean what, like, for example, would that translate into the treatment of a patient also, in that hey, in this session we're going to focus on you talking through things that are great about you and your life. Is that kind of
That's
what it is?
more coaching. That's more what I do.
I see.
What I created was self-actualization coaching. But all the research in positive psychology is about, how can we nurture the best within us, outside of a clinical context. Although there are some positive psychologists that are now trying to apply some of these things within a clinical psychology context. There's a growing field of positive clinical psychology. There's a field called prospection, which is not so focused on obsessing over your past, but helping people be driven by their future, help people be more driven by their be drawn to the future, and be pulled into who they want to become, as opposed to always ruminate on their past. So there are people who are trying to apply some of the stuff to clinical psychology, but a lot of it's just applied to everyone. During your daily life, what are the things you can do uh, to have more gratitude in your life, to have more life satisfaction, positive emotions like joy, awe, and wonder, and less anxiety in your life.
Yeah, yeah, that's I mean the goal for everybody, and I think in education, and this would be maybe kind of our final little topic to dig around here would be all the things you just described for a teacher really should be. Our goal is to set up a framework and a almost like a playpen, so to speak, for our students to start experimenting in whatever our subject matter is, whether we're the choir teacher or the history teacher or whatever it is, that we create this playpen where kids can start to playfully express and explore the ways in which they're going to figure those things out about themselves. And I'm very hopeful. I think it was very towards the beginning of our conversation. You brought up one of your projects, which is to hopefully someday go into school districts and talk to teachers. And I'm like, okay, this is exciting for me because I hope you're very successful with that. Because one of the things that I've noticed in education is that we don't do a very good job oftentimes in going outside of the field of education to other fields to seek expertise on things. We tend to go, like for example, that website that I cited a minute ago from about Maslow. The citation at the bottom was an educational specialist who is then misrepresenting Maslow all the way down the website, and I'm like, well, but I'm sure there are experts in Maslow that this person could have called, but we don't tend to do that. We don't get much information from cognitive science in education. We don't get very much information from medical science. We tend to stick within our own. And so I'm interested in as you plan this project and as you explore this project that you're working on, is that something that you've encountered at all? Are there pushback to some of these ideas, or is this something that people have been really receptive to?
Mostly receptive.
That's
Uh,
great.
just been lucky. Maybe I've just been lucky, but um, m- I, I can't think of any example of any pushback. I think that at the end of the day, teachers get into their profession because they really do want to realize the potential, help realize the potential and see and discover. I mean, I think there's nothing more exciting for a teacher than to be the one to discover this hidden potential in a student that the student wasn't even aware of. I mean, that's such a poignant moment for teachers when they can encounter that. And I think self-actualization coaching gets teachers more in touch with why they got into it in the first place. And so, um, I'm really excited about this coaching program that we're building up.
Yeah, well, as you get that built up, feel free to keep me posted, and I'll try to
I will.
blast it out to the teachers in my network. And because I agree with you, I think that those types of approaches to the student as a whole person, albeit smaller, but a whole person, is really really important. And if we can kind of separate ourselves from this strict hierarchy thing that we've been talking about, and maybe think of it as a more integrated, connected set of needs in that complicated way, then I think we're going to, we'll be able to have more of an expansive pedagogy as you in your field work towards more of an expansive psychology, so to speak. That's wonderful. So I could just nerd out with you all evening, but I want to respect your time. So on our way out the door, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, if there were two or three things that you like, a way a listener could find you, kind of keep track of your projects and maybe your writings, etc. Where are the best places to find you?
I would say centerforhumanpotential.com, scottbarrykaufman.com, thepsychologypodcast.com. You'll find everything at one of those three. You can follow me on Instagram if you want a more personal touch and you want to drop me a DM. Feel free. I was gonna make one more point
Yes,
um,
please.
about you're in a unique position with the kind of thing you teach because it naturally brings out transcendent experiences in kids, not all subject matters are lend themselves equally
Mhm.
to a transcendent human experience. But you're in just a beautiful position to just create the conditions for transcendence within a school system, and not. Again, I don't think it's as easy for all teachers to create the conditions for transcendence,
Yeah,
but you can.
you're absolutely right. There is something special and beautiful about
Absolutely.
the integration between the mind, the body, the linguistic mechanism, the self exploration that has to happen just to get a kid to the point where they're willing to sometimes sing in front of people. All of those things come together in this kind of incredible stew that does, you're exactly right, lend itself to these transcendent moments. And then, of course, the goal, it's almost like becomes an addictive drug for kids. They want to seek those moments again and again and again. And then that leads us to our curriculum, which is that then they seek out the curriculum. They think they want to become better singers. They want to become better music readers. They want to, because then it's almost like that will help me get to those moments sooner and better. So it is really a beautiful thing. And I'm really glad that you had a chance in your young life to experiment with that and experience it.
I wanna join a choir again.
It's
So,
never too late.
yeah. No, exactly. So I have plans to audition for a choir, so.
Now, where I can't remember if I asked you this at the beginning. Where are you right now physically?
Santa Monica, California.
Santa Monica. Okay, so I'm sure that because I want to make sure that that's on there because there'll be I have California listeners, so maybe if there's a choir anywhere near Santa Monica, Scott wants to know about it.
Thank you, but I'm bi-coastal, so, I was actually thinking of joining a choir in New York City when I go
Oh,
back.
okay, you'll find more of them there.
Yeah, there's more of them there, yeah.
You will
But
definitely find more of them.
I heard of one. I heard of one that my friend is in that's really good. So,
Oh,
I
cool. Well, yeah, keep me posted about that too. If you decide to do that, that would be
gotta
really
brush
cool.
up my annual stay. I gotta brush up on my
Now, what
support.
what is your voice type? If you sing in a choir, what part do you like to sing?
Uh, baritone.
Okay. Yep.
Uh, yeah, so well, they put me in bass too in choirs because I have a very low range, but I actually have like a 3-octave range, so
Mhm.
they always needed more basses.
Right. Yeah.
Hello.
You'll get stuck there. You'll get stuck there if you can do those notes.
There, stuck there. But my happy place is, baritone, and with solos I can do Barry tenor, you know.
Hmm. That's very cool.
Like but I can also go.
Right. No, that's good. That's really awesome. That's very cool. Well, Scott, I have really enjoyed chatting with you and picking your brain on some expertise things, but also just hearing you kind of banter back and forth with me has been a lot of fun. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, and thanks for letting me sing on your show.
Yeah. Yes. Don't worry. I'm sure some of those clips will come out. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, as always, for sticking around to the end of the episode. I hope you got a lot out of that. I love hearing from Scott, whether it be in his books, on his podcast. Sadly, he has left Twitter, as a lot of people have. But there are lots of ways to reach Scott. I encourage you to look out for some of his content and his books in the future and his education project that is coming up. If you have the power in your school district to recommend different types of teacher trainings, I would encourage you to look for the types that he is talking about creating. I think they would be incredible. I hope we can get some of it in my school. So thank you so much. Don't forget, on the way out, there are things you can do to help this show survive. Join the Patreon, patreon.com/Choralosophy. That's huge. Enter the Choralosophy promo code at endeavormusicpublishing.com. I almost said ryanmain.com, but it's now endeavormusicpublishing.com, graphitepublishing.com, mymusicfolders.com, and Voce Vista audio analyzing software you can get in the show notes here. It's choralosophy.com/voce-vista. And you can enter the Choralosophy promo code at all of those websites. These are huge ways that you can help the show. And of course, just interact with the content. Like, share, leave ratings, all of that good stuff. You know the drill. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.